do have a few polling questions for you where we'll ask you specific questions. But if you have any specific questions for us, please use your question bar on the right. So just type it in there, ask a question. We will try to get to all the questions as quickly as we can. Sometimes we'll wait for a little while until we actually have a little bit of time. So you'll see here, ask a question. If you have feedback, any comments, please send them to us. We really, really appreciate your input. This is, again, an interactive process, and we love to work with you on this. So if you're having any trouble with sound, you probably can't hear me right now, but if you see on your screen, if you have any problems in the future, or if you want to work with this, just click the settings button next to your mic or phone. Any of the information that you like here, if there's anything that you need to reference for later, please check out retrotec.com. You'll see in the downloads section, in the webinar section, you'll be able to find the recording of the webinars, and you can always get any reference material, any of our quick guides, any of our manuals, any of our training right there online. It's a really great resource for you. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Joe Medosh, and he's going to be delivering a webinar here on the DM32. Joe, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. And that was Jay West, if you didn't catch the voice. So Jay is our connection and trainer out of Chicago, and he's our weather station specialist and also our passive house specialist. So we cover a lot of gamuts, and today we're going to focus on just kind of an overview on Retrotec, and there are some other things you can find out on the website that may obviously support what we're going to talk about today, or some information that would help you. Retrotec has some great quick guides that are really well designed actually to work as a checklist to help you with QA. They're very visual. They make the learning curve simple, and a reminder if you haven't played with something in a while, what to do next. So you can find many of those, and a library actually of manuals that complement it. So the quick guide is just really like a how-to, a field guide, and the manuals are a very in-depth, thorough understanding about actually the process and the procedures and the math and a whole kinds of other stuff. So if you're looking for more, the manuals on the page will help you out a lot. They do have some stuff that we recommend highly on the quick guide about doing field checks and checking your gauge regularly. We feel those are very important, even how to actually check your fan. So those are very good. So we want to get a couple of polls out of the way. They're real simple. So Jay, you want to throw up a poll for us? So the gauge by itself. So we'll make sure as we do this discussion that this is a non-Wi-Fi or a gauge that we're not using the Wi-Fi features. I do realize there's a Wi-Fi icon on it, but the goal was just to focus on what the gauge does without any additional apps or anything that's extra, right? So I want to make sure that it's clear that we're talking about, and you guys can see if you're not familiar, many of you have the gauge, obviously, that you have, it's a 2-channel gauge, all right? Most of the gauges that you can buy today are always going to be that kind of concept. Channel B on the left, channel A on the right. Channel A is always giving you what the fan does, all right? And channel B is actually giving you your results, all right? So if you haven't seen the top of the gauge, or you're looking to upgrade or change, one of the things I do point out is that people always wonder what's the color coding that Retrotec follows. And Retrotec fans are yellow, and their tubing goes yellow to the yellow fan. And they have red for blower door. It goes to the red cloth. So that's kind of the concept behind how they have chosen to do their color coding. So I'll go through quick things about the display. Many of this is familiar. I do have a live gauge here I can do, and we're going to make sure that if there's anything that you're looking to see or want to make sure we cover, please throw it in the questions, and I can check that as we go, looking for any information about something you might want to make sure gets covered. So the previous slide, this is what it looks like when you're not doing a test or you're actually not running a fan. This is the home screen. And when you are running, it's going to look like this. So the difference is whether or not I have basically the pressure's up, pressure down, and the stop in the middle. And it also gives me the add feature. So here I'm running a duct test. I can tell by the icon that shows up. Everything is on the gauge is touchscreen, which I'm sure as you own it, you've figured that out. And we'll make sure that you know what it is that happens when you touch some of these. Some people are gun shy about actually interacting with the gauge, afraid something's going to happen or get messed up. So we'll go through some of those. So channel A at the top will give you your pressure that you're using for testing. And it also is a hold area. So if I tap on that area while I'm doing a test, it will hold the results. Same as the other gauges have a hold feature. So that's how I can actually grab a snapshot of the screen. It'll hold all of the results. I can actually change the results while it's on hold and go through what are some other answers or results that I may have gotten, and then tap it again and it will release the hold. Channel B is below. That's going to give me my results. They can be in CFM. It can be for a duct tester CFM per 100, per 1,000, for 1 square foot, 100 square feet, 1,000 square feet, a variety of options you have for your results. And that was intended to help you with code compliance. It's also blower door will do air changes per hour. And as many of you know, those are actually calculated from a number, which we'll discuss on how you find that and where we get that. The device and the actual range or the rings that are selected could never be any easier. You actually just tap the picture and you'll pick a new range or pick a new device, and it forces you to make sure you pick a range, and then you go back and you see exactly what device and what range you're working with. At the top is your time average. That can go from anywhere from a few seconds to you can actually enter your own. And it gives me a speed at the top so I can determine how hard the fan is actually working. So real quick, I do a PowerPoint and I'll actually do it live. So I tap on the range. These are the ranges for the 200. I select the range I need, and it automatically goes back. If I want to change a device, I tap on the same icon, and now at the bottom, I'll actually hit Change Device. It brings up a variety of devices from either Retrotec. I can select the 1000. It forces me to pick a range. I pick a range, and now I just went from the duct tester to the blower door on the B range. So the test results, I can change the results by just tapping on channel B, and it'll actually allow me to change from CFM to air changes per hour, CFM per 100 square feet, and on the bottom, the arrow for the gauge actually sends you back home or to the previous section that you're at. So the little dots are trying to indicate that there's other pages or other sets of data that we may want to access for settings. So I tap that. I have another set of EQLA, EFLA, a variety of options, and each one of them I can set. I can actually change it from square inches to cubic centimeters, or a variety of options that lies in each one of them. You tap it again, it just cycles through all of my results to get displayed, and the arrow takes me back. So I just changed my CFM into air changes per hour. So I do have a question that says, can the DM32 perform a multi-point test like their TechDiag software? And that's a great question, Danny. And the limitations in the gauge don't allow it to do that right now. That is a goal for the gauge and actually the software that complements this. So the multi-point test is something that their Retrotec is working on. Oh, Jay may be taking care of some of your questions. So if there are good questions, Jay, leave them up there, so I'll try address them to the crowd.
Sure. One that's come up a couple times here, Joe, is just how do they know which one is channel A and which one is channel B?
Okay. So I will admit that not everything is perfect in reality. So on the gauge, it has channel A, channel B, input and reference actually molded into the gauge, and they're kind of hard to read. They're trying to figure out a solution to that. Honestly, I took a black crayon and just kind of like went over it and put some black marks on it so I could help see it on a couple of my gauges. But for here, it's the yellow and green are channel A, and blue and red are channel B. And it is something that is hard to sometimes remember or get used to. But if you do look closely, you can see the reference and input, and you can also see the A and B in the plastic itself, if that helps.
And on the screen?
Okay, so on the screen, the top is channel A, which actually right now I have a negative 50.2. And the lower section, which I have results, is 7.2. That's channel B. So basically, channel B is right across from each other, and yeah, right here you can see it here. Channel A is on the top, channel B is on the bottom. So channel A also functions as your test results or your test pressure. Channel B also is your results or the mode. If you use either of the other gauges, the word was mode and not results, but really what you're after is what are the results from the test. Your gauge is showing CFM per 1,000 square feet. So what can happen is, let me go through a few things here. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to bring up my gauge itself. All right, is this visible on the screen, Jay? Can you guys see this?
Can see pretty well. If anybody else.
So this is actually a gauge that I have on my desk on the side that I can actually go through some live features so you can see how they actually really interact live. Okay, so on the top is channel A, where my finger is now. I got 0.0, and below says CFM, but I have no test running, so there's no results. All right. So we just talked a second ago about changing the device. I can tap on the itself, and this would be to change the range. I can just select any of these here, right? One thing I do want to mention is that the touchscreen is not like your phone. You may have already figured that out by now, but it is actually pressure sensitive, not a heat and moisture sensitive, or however your phone works. So you do need to just give it a one firm press as I described and let go, and it'll work fine for you. You can also use a stylus or something that was designed for other types of interactive. So if I press touchscreen, so I could do change gauge. All right, so now I have all of the Retrotec options here, and on the next side I have many Apple's options, and they have a function here of actually having to do a whole flow. I know it's hard to read the screen, but I wanted to not use any software to show you really what the gauge did by itself. So if I pick a blower door up here, this is the 1000, the numbers are at the top, so that's the 1000 blower door. It makes me pick a range from open, A, B, C. So I'll pick a C8, which is all open. And it helps because you can actually now identify the picture that goes along with what the range looks like. Somebody asked a second ago about the results, and they actually had CFM per 1,000 square feet. So what can happen is when I'm on here, I can just toggle, and it'll go from 100 to, it actually went to cubic meters. That's actually CFM per square foot, liters per second per cubic meter. There's the 1,000. So if I just keep toggling, I actually have lots of options in terms of units or choices that I can use as the results. So once I have it, I leave it here. I said, okay, I'm going to do CFM per 100 square feet. I'll toggle through. That's 1,000. There's 100. Then I can actually go down and go the back button, or I can also hit the home button. So if I just hit the home button, it will take those changes, and it's giving me right now CFM per 100 square feet. All right. So again, we talked earlier about that air changes per hour or CFM per whatever square footage requires an area. And when you actually have selected those results, the area now shows up on the screen as something I can change. So if I'm going to select area, and again, this is for CFM per 100 square feet. So area would be the square footage of the house. Typically that's done for a duct tester. So if I'm going to do, maybe it's a 1,800 square foot home, and hit set. All right. So now it tells me my area is 1,800 square feet. And when I do a test for a duct tester, I would actually get results for that. So I have a blower door that I'll be running next. So if I chose the air changes per hour, and so it's hard to tell, but this is a little brighter red than the other ones. All right. So if I do air changes per hour, I hit the back button. And now notice that air changes per hour requires a volume as part of its calculation. So I can just hit volume. It wants to know what's the cubic feet of the house. I'm going to say it's 24,000. Hit set. And now when I run my blower door, I can actually get air change results live in the gauge as I do the test based upon this volume. One of the questions that comes up is if I'm running a test, I'll do set pressure 50. I don't have a fan connected, but it'll actually simulate what the gauge looks like. So I have a gauge running, and I have air changes per hour. And if I need to change the volume, I can do that under settings. So I have the baseline, area, volume, time average, and the results to be displayed, which are the same as channel B. So if I can hit volume, and I can change it in the same way I could have before the test was done. I'll stop the test. One of the ones that comes up frequently is where's the baseline to do the blower door, right? So it's under settings, and it's at the top. So if I do baseline, I'm just going to start a capture, and I'll be able to see any changes, or I'll try to fake some numbers here. There we go. And it's telling me at the bottom what's my duration. Right now I have 10, 12 seconds. It tells me what my pascals are. So if I'm like, well, it's not that very windy, seems to be a very calm day, I can hit in capture. I can either clear that baseline and do it again, right? Or I can start all over. So I'm going to say I accept those. And when I go back again to the home screen, there's actually the baseline right there. So my baseline was 0.2, and it's actually showing that as part of the channel A readings. So somebody asked, can any screen guard be used to protect the screen? That is correct. In fact, I use, what's the brand that I use? I use a invisible shield. It's by Zagg, Z-A-G-G. I don't make any money off Zagg, but they're the ones that I put on all of my phones and my gauges. It's a little pricey, but it works really well. It's well protected. And they have two that come with it as a replacement. So if you really want to get an upgrade, that would be your choice. But they do actually have ones that come with the ones that are shipping now. Any other questions, Jay, before I head to the next stage?
Sure, Joe. David Gibbs wanted to know if you could give an example of effective and equivalent leakage areas.
They're actually well, it's actually a third-party kind of requirement in terms of who would actually be wanting those, and there's a variety of differences between whether or not you're going to do. I'll go through the settings real quick. So, right back. So equivalent leakage area is kind of like what it is per. I'll be honest. Sometimes I get these confused because I don't use them every day. It's not my reality that I deal with. So equivalent leakage area. It's here. It's described as being converted to 10 pascals, and that's an industry standard. Most of these are from Canada, so if you're going to do a standard, you're able to convert these standards instantly. So effective leakage area usually is how big is the hole that you're dealing with, if you want to describe that to a homeowner. But if you wanted to make that a standardization, it's all converted back to a different Pascal on a industry standard. I try and simplify that as best I can so it kind of makes sense. But one is actually kind of more of a different types of descriptions. I guess it's hard to describe without actually just trying to use it as an example. So it's more and less, it's like, really, what does your program require? If you already just want to describe somebody, what is the effective leakage area on the next page, is I can give it to you in square inches right there. So that actually would tell me the results.
So, Joe, you mentioned industry standards. Do you know of any codes or any standards in North America? Not that you're an expert, but do you know of any that use equivalent leakage?
Canada has requirements to do both of these, to my understanding.
Okay.
You know what I can, thank you, David. It's a challenging thing. And what we can do is we'll make sure we follow up in an email to show you who was actually requiring those. So the one that I just use as a rule of thumb is whatever my CFM, I'm going to convert this back to CFM. Whatever my results are in CFM, let's say I have 1,200 CFM as the results for my blower door. I kind of divide it by 10. So I have 120 square inches that I can now convert or explain to the homeowner what that is. So that's kind of like the poor man, or the simple version of how that works. All right. So I went through the features that are there. If there's something else that you want to see or want me to make sure it's clear for you, don't hesitate to use this as a technical support session also. So our goal is to make sure that you got more out of your gauge, or you got an overview as to what it does. So again, we're still sticking with the gauge that is not using Wi-Fi, but even if it is Wi-Fi, it can use these cabling. So Ethernet, which is at the bottom, and the USB is the smaller port there, it's basically is unlimited. You can actually go from, it's about 325 feet or 100 meters with a single cord, and then you actually need to use a powered hub or something that actually repeats the signal or boosts the signal. USB is limited by about 15 feet, and you can only kind of combine 5 cables, but again, you need some kind of power hub, or they do make a lot of cables now that have a power booster inside of it that can go to 30 or maybe even 60 feet that are boost that signal. They all have their own challenges sometimes. So USB is a very small, simple connection. Ethernet can go as long as you really would ever desire. So there's some software, again, that still works if you do not have Wi-Fi. So if you have a version that's non-Wi-Fi, and one of the people ask is, how do I know if my unit is Wi-Fi? And when it first starts up and it's got what's called the splash screen, or the cool graphic with the world, it'll actually say in big bold letters Wi-Fi. After it's gone through that, at the bottom it gives you some information about its calibration and whether it's Wi-Fi. Or we can actually go through the settings, go to the last page, and it'll tell you about the gauge. So that's those are your options. Question here: if you're using 2 fans on a blower door, your question is kind of a combination of either cabling or Wi-Fi. I'm going to come back to that for you, Chris. So some people commented that if you're using Fantastic, in fact, if you're going to use Fantastic, that's actually the software that Retrotec uses for to do multi-fan testing, larger building and multifamily. I highly recommend that you're going to use Ethernet. USB is very limited in terms of its distance, and you can get a what's called a switch or an Ethernet hub, and you can put multiple gauges, as many as you really can fathom, onto that. In fact, it easily goes to 25 without any additional changes to the software. 25 gauges, that is, and you can use that through fantastic software. So the data logger, there's some really powerful software that Retrotec has, but and there's some more that's coming out this fall. But I firmly feel that this is one of the strongest bits of software that the industry actually has right now. I'm familiar with what Energy Conservatory does or some other options, but this is the simplest, easiest method for literally logging the data that runs through your gauge I've seen. So as I have up there, it works with your DM2. So if you have an older DM2 or you're still using your DM2, it will work with your DM2. And it can work with Wi-Fi or without Wi-Fi. And you can use it with USB, or you can use it through any of your variety of connections. So you do not have to have Wi-Fi to use this. So it's a free software. Basically, it looks like this. So I set my gauge up. Everything's ready to go. This is the method that I use. So I would start logging. There's a little button there that says start logging. I can actually determine the interval here. Do I want to do 1 second or half second or 5 seconds or 2 minutes? And then I hit start logging. So I'm now logging the data. And it's going to keep track of whatever goes through the gauge, channel A and channel B. What is my range? What are the settings? A variety of other basic stuff that you would need or want to keep track of. So when I'm done with my test, I stop the test. So I like to see the gauge ramp up from pretty much 0, run the test, and then you watch it ramp down so I can see all the results that happen. You can just run the test, and in the middle of the test, hit start logging and just keep that. Wait. I had a sample. What's that look like? Maybe it's coming up in a second. Question. Will you be showing wire configurations for multi-fan setups, 5 or more fans? I won't go into that exactly because it depends on the type of testing you may be doing. So what I usually do, Ken, is actually at the end. We stay around and actually make sure that awkward questions got answered at the end. So hopefully at the end of this, I can go through that with you. It depends on you're doing using Fantastic or you just want to use the gauges by themselves. And how many gauges can you log at the same time? As far as I know, as many as your router will allow or your system will allow it to grab, you can actually log. And let me just move this slide down. So what it looks like is when I'm done logging, it actually creates a CSV file, which usually opens up in Excel, and it looks like this. So here's what I have. Somebody asked about multiple fans. These are 4 gauges grabbing data at the same time. So these are the serial numbers you can see. So these are all DM32s, right? I could have had a DM2 in here, but these are all DM32s. These are the different serial numbers, and see that they grab as a chunk of 4, then they repeat and they repeat. So every 1 second as the interval, it's grabbing data. So these 2 are doing 1,000. That's running the 3,000 series, and that's another 1,000 blower door. It tells me the range, tells me the pressure on channel A and the pressure on channel B, and it also tells me the calculated results and what the units are. And if I change the results or the units during the test, it will actually show those and show where what the results really were. But it always is keeping track of pressure A and pressure B. So it's a very valuable tool that when you left the job, you would know what happened. If you want to share your results with somebody, you can see exactly what happened. And if you want to give them to a code official or your provider, or just really good quality QA that actually becomes QC, this is a great process. I'll do a little zoom up so you kind of see that. So again, it shows the different gauges. And if I change the range, here's one of the things that happens. So maybe somebody can confirm. So if you do your first, maybe it's your second test. It's a blower door test. Could be a duct test, but blower door test. And you have to change the range. You change the rings. When I drove away, I could remember physically changing the rings. I know that I changed it from the A to the B, but I don't know if I changed it on the gauge. And unless you took a picture of it or you're phenomenal memory, this is where that actually comes into play. So if I changed my range, this data logger would have kept track of that and showed me what my range had changed to. So it's a really good way when you leave to feel more secured about what your data was. If you do have the Wi-Fi, here's how powerful this becomes, is that I save it directly to a Dropbox folder. You could use Box or Sugar Sync or Google Drive. I learned iCloud doesn't work. That's the Mac version. And as soon as it's able to upload, whether you're in the field or as soon as you get back to your office, now I actually have a document that has track changes. So if you have several people working with your group, or you really want to keep track of your what somebody's maybe doing in the field or yourself, as soon as it's actually in Dropbox, here's what happens if it looks like there's a change. So it was added 13 minutes ago, and then if somebody changed it, it actually shows the changes. So you actually can confirm what the original was, and if anybody went in and changed any numbers or altered any of the data. So that's how it becomes very powerful. So you can, if you have several people you're working with in weatherization, or multiple people doing results or training, they can all use the same Dropbox to put their results in, and they're easily seen by one person. You cannot run Fantastic or the data logger at the same time. It has to do with actually where the gauge gets assigned to. So the gauge can either be assigned to Fantastic or the data logger. So the data logger is really designed for just a couple of gauges. I've done a small multifamily with 4, which is very simple to do and easily keep track, and I can make graphs out of it. But the reality is, if you're going to use Fantastic, it actually does a fully automated test for you. You can do manual, but that's the difference between whether or not I actually run all my fans automatic with Fantastic, or I'm actually going to run them and just log the data. Of all the things that are the most powerful part of the DM32 is that it has this configurator and ability to get smarter. So I can do firmware updates. So as soon as I plug my gauge in with a USB into my computer and I open up the configurator, it will say, oh, there's an update. Do you want to do it? And it will update the firmware. And so far, we're actually, I think we're on version 34. So if you look at your gauge and you go through the settings, on the very last page, it actually has a firmware version. So some people may have 15, some people may have 26, some people may have 34, I believe it is. So your configurator will confirm if you have the most up-to-date firmware. That allows you to add more devices. Maybe we've tweaked some of the ways that the gauge interacts. So those are some of the best features that have really make this gauge an incredibly smart investment. You can also do, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, just a question about that. So does that affect how frequently you actually have to have the gauge calibrated?
It's not actually a calibration. It actually is just more like kind of like your phone will have updates. I know my kids are talking about, the iPhone 8 is coming out. So that's the same kind of like firmware or software that's in the device. If you have a Samsung or whatever kind of phone you have, they also have updates. It's that kind of same concept. But the actual calibration is based upon something that only the manufacturers can do. So the DM32 is a 5-year calibration cycle, which means it does not need to be calibrated for 5 years. And the newer version, when you update the firmware, one of the things it tells you on the screen that first pops up is when was this first calibrated, so I can actually see that date or kind of confirm that. I know by the end of the year, you'll be able to go online to your account that you have at Retrotec, and you can actually download or see your calibration specs and download those and access those. The other two things that this does here, there's some few settings you can change, or if you are going to use a special network that has a security, this is where you go through to actually change that. Or I use Wi-Fi, but I use a Wi-Fi that has no password. It's just open, so it's easy for any of my gauges to get connected to it. But if you do have one that has a password, you use the configurator to actually put that password in and save it to the gauge. So at the bottom, you can see firmware updates, some settings, or network. So under network, which I have here, you can actually see that I have a network and that there has a password and what that is. So that's kind of how this free tool also works well for you. So when you got your gauge, there was a family of software to download, one of which was the configurator, one was a data logger, and the other one could have been virtual gauge, because that also can work with USB. There is a certificate of calibration included with the equipment, and it doesn't actually have a firmware update. I think because some of the stuff that happens is they check the gauge, it's updated, but it's not actually connected to the calibration itself, but it does list when it was calibrated. Based on a 5-year cycle, I'm sure there'll be emails or a variety of options to remind people about, hey, your gauge will need to be calibrated, and all that'll be built into the gauge within the next 5 years. I'm sure of that. Within 5 years, you'll be running your blower door with things that are on your eyeglasses or your arm or something. So the technology is moving so fast that this is pretty exciting for all of us. But the reality is that things are happening quicker in our technology, and this is one of those devices that is trying to keep up with that or allows you that kind of flexibility. It does control Minneapolis fans, which also means the exhaust fan flow meter, the exhaust fan flow grid. I'm sure I mispronounced that. And one of the other questions I get frequently is, will it do a combustion appliance zone test? So it does do a CAS test. There's really the only difference between the DG 700 and the Retrotec gauges is that they actually have the built-in speed control adapters or ability inside the gauge. The Minneapolis fans run off of a speed control that's manual that sits below the gauge. Retrotec fans, especially within the last couple of years, they actually have that also. It's on the fan itself. There's a little knob that allows you to control the fan manually in the same manner that I don't need the gauge to actually run the fan. I can actually do it manually and read it in the same manner. So I can actually adjust the speed control on the fan and see the results directly in the gauge, or I can use the gauge to actually control the fan itself. If you are considering upgrading, or if you recently got a DM32 and you have Minneapolis equipment, I'm sure you can call Scott, the salesperson, and work out a situation to get the adapter to make sure it works with your fan. Some people have 2 or 3 fans, one of which may be Minneapolis. So I'm sure Scott will work with you on that. Or if you are going to upgrade, make sure he knows, so he knows how to put that into your package. If you're a trainer, we gladly will make sure that you have those to work with for your group. All right, so there is the non-Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi. And the reality is there's no difference and how they look, how they act, how they feel, the software, all that stuff is almost identical on how it actually works. And if for some reason you just opted to get one that's non-Wi-Fi, then you can actually have that done over through the internet. That's an easily done upgrade. So you can get a hold of Scott, and he can actually you can purchase a code and turn your non-Wi-Fi unit into a Wi-Fi unit. There's also a buyback program. So if you have a DM2, which is the Retrotec older gauge, or if you have a DG700, they will buy those back at a considerable discount to upgrade to the new DM32. So I don't know if it's exactly. I don't do prices. I don't do sales. So Scott can actually go through what your options are. But if you're looking to upgrade and you have one that you don't want to use anymore, or you want to use that, that's your opportunity. The next place where I'm going to go is into the Wi-Fi arena, as I'll call it, because it gets a little challenging at this point. So I do have a couple questions about the Wi-Fi, or does it do this or does it do that? So I'm going to go through, and hopefully that becomes clear for everybody. So somebody asked about the family of software. All of that is actually available online at retrotec.com. If you go on the gauge, there's actually at the bottom a software or accessories kind of a concept, and that'll take you to that. There's also a software page that actually has links to all of the software we discussed here. There's even a free trial version of the Fantastic if you're doing multi-fan and you want to try that also. So I have both gauges here. When I teach and I instruct or I travel, I always talk about both gauges. Colin Ginge, the owner of Retrotec, always encourages universal training. So the concept of Wi-Fi is either it will create its own Wi-Fi connection. That means the gauge itself will do that, or their adapter. But the gauge has a built-in Wi-Fi. So if you're going to get a DM32, again, non-Wi-Fi or has Wi-Fi built in, and it has the feature of being able to do direct. Direct means that it communicates directly with your other device, whether it's your computer, your phone, your tablet, whatever that is. It is the only thing they communicate with. It's like shaking hands. The only thing they can do is communicate directly through that. There is no options of multiple. Your gauge will not work actually as a hub or as a router. It just says, here's my signal. Who wants to connect to it? So that's actually how Create works. So it's a direct connection. The gauge works as the hotspot or the access point. You do not actually need a router. They do have some limitations as to their distance. For an average home, it will do most of the stuff you're needing to do. But if it's a large home, you're not going to be able to go from end to end. You really aren't going to probably be able to go 3 stories. It depends on the construction. So sometimes it can, sometimes it will not. Again, you do not need a router. One of the questions I just kind of throw out is, who here in our audience can actually create a hotspot on their phone? So if you're still listening, let us know if you can do a hotspot on your phone for us. Which means you actually take your phone, go to Wi-Fi, create hotspot, and other people could join, or you could use that as an access point. This is kind of a test your knowledge kind of a question. The other option is that the gauge will join another connection, which means that it'll join a hotspot. Some people carry around a hotspot that works with their internet. A hotspot could also be your router. What other kind of network device you have, it can join that. So you actually need a source, and it is best if it has no password or unsecured. So I actually have a router that I use when I test. I just carry it with me. It's very small, and I know that however many gauges I have, they all find the same source. It's all on the same computer, and it all works seamlessly.
Joe, this might be a good place to answer the question here. Can the DM32 act as a DHCP server?
Yeah, I tried to answer.
That
I didn't do that exactly. So it cannot actually be the router or the source for multiple devices to connect to it, but it actually will create the signal that other devices can then connect only directly to it. So, for instance, if I had direct connect on for my DM32, I could connect it to my phone or my PC, but I couldn't do both. It doesn't really work that way. So it's just if you have a phone, it actually can limit your ability to possibly go online, depending on how your phone works or what the connection process is. So some people say, "Oh, that answers my question. I need a router." Yeah, I don't. You don't need a super duper router. I can tell you that it makes your life on the site a whole lot easier. That I can go anywhere in the house and do any of those things. So, actually, Joshua, I've bought several different types of routers from TP Link to who's the other one I have? Cisco. I just got one recently, so I haven't found a manufacturer. I'm like, oh, didn't work with us or didn't work that way. But I think just something that seems small and durable, and whatever kind of case you've got, it just can stay in the case. It doesn't need to be like brought out or set anywhere separate or special. Its signal works fine in your little briefcase, as long as it's not something that's resisting the signal, but something that seems simple and easily plugged in. There are some that work off a USB, which means there's no hard power. Some have battery; they're not as strong, but yeah, we'll try and do a follow up and confirm some of those. So yeah. So again, you're going to use multiple options.
Thanks, Joe.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
About 5 minutes left, Joe. Thanks.
Thank you. You can join with multiple devices, phone, hotspot, and they all need to be connected to the same network. You do not use your homeowner's Wi-Fi. You do not show up at somebody's house and ask them for their access code or their password to their internet or their Wi-Fi or their router, because they will look at you as though you're trying to steal their data. So there's a variety of options, and most routers can cost you anywhere from $30 to $60 on Amazon, and will do fine for your needs. Question, Jay? Jay, your mic's on. So here's the one lesson. There's a few lessons, hopefully, that you were successful. Whether it's your router, your mobile hotspot, you can use your smartphone or your tablet actually as the hub. They can actually be the hotspot that's created by your phone. Can do a hotspot. Most of your other devices can do that. So any of these can actually be the source. The reality is that everything must be on the same network. And that's always the challenge. It's not working. It's not working. It's because something switched, and your tablets are notorious for wanting to help you find a better network. All right, I'm going to pause on the. So I'll just give a brief slide here. So there's two different types of software. There's the GaugeRemote app, and that's for smartphones and tablets. It's available at the Google Store or the Apple Store. Virtual Gauge is actually the PC software. Again, it's part of the suite of the Virtual Gauge configurator and data logger, and you can download that at the Retrotec site. But whether you have a Android or an Apple device, the GaugeRemote will control your device remotely. GaugeRemote is actually a much more expansive and much more powerful app itself. I do want to just spend, I know my time is towards an end here, but I just want to show you at the, what I'll do is 1 second. So I brought up the virtual gauge just so you can see the two in action here. So I do find gauges. It found it. I'll click on this one. Of course, there's an error. It sits around for too long. So on the screen here, what I can do when I go through settings, on the next page is your network options. So it either says join. I know it's hard to read because actually it's joined one, or it'll toggle through. It'll do join, or it'll do create, which we talked about, that it's a direct source. I can disable the network setting or wired. And we talked about earlier about actually using Ethernet. This is the wired setting for Ethernet. So if you can do multifamily and either the data logger or a variety of other means to do this with your router or your fantastic, it's a wired setting that happens there. So I'll spend my last minute. I'm just going to give you the visual as it happens. So here's how you can use some of this Wi-Fi to be better, smarter in the field. So this is doing a combustion appliance zone where the actual gauge stays in the combustion appliance zone. I can now roam throughout the house and turn on and off fans, open and close doors, and see the actual results on my phone from the combustion appliance zone. Some people do duct testing either on the fly or air sealing on the fly. I can now turn on or off the duct tester while I'm in the attic and see my results or see what's happening as they do that. You can do the blower door from the kitchen, and when you have something on your screen with a PC, you can share your results. So we're going to do a specialty just on the apps themselves, but I want to just kind of give you an understanding about how powerful they are. We will be, Jay will be at the Passive House National Conference, and next week, same time, same place, we'll be testing exhaust fans and ERVs. I will be down at the Insulation Installers Convention in Orlando, and basically every Tuesday, whenever possible, we will be doing a webinar. So if you have an idea or suggestion about a webinar that you'd like to have done, please throw it up on the screen there.